Hey, what's up guys, it's Dylan Distorted, back with another hilarious Reddit video. Today we're going to be covering the subreddit r/ProRevenge. This first story comes from the user FalseRip9. Racist boss harassed Puerto Rican employees and broke labor laws. Ended up getting deported. I worked at a fairly well-known restaurant in a small northern New England city as an assistant manager. The owners were very successful restaurateurs, with several successful non-chain establishments, and spent maybe a day or two a month in our location. The rest of the time, there was a general manager in charge. We'll call her Jan. Jan was about as type A as they come. She was a middle-aged woman, but beautiful and petite, and she always looked put together and primed. Jan had started with the owners a decade earlier in their first restaurant as a server, and had worked her way up to the general manager over the years. At first, I just thought that she had extremely high standards, which I respected. I have high standards as well, and take pride in my work. I had been impressed by how the kitchens were spotless. The staff was immaculate, like run a white-gloved hand over the back of the oven and it comes back white kinda clean. And the food was always top quality. I had frequently been a customer and was thrilled that I got the job there. I had been in the business for a decade, and that restaurant was the place in our area. I was so excited. Unfortunately, I quickly learned why everything was so shiny and perfect. Jan was a tyrant. She was the kind of boss who soured the mood of the entire staff like a storm cloud hovering over us that never went away. Nothing was ever good enough, and the standards changed from day to day. On a good day, she would shut herself in the office and then leave early. Good days were very rare, and could turn into bad days at the drop of a dime. On bad days, you couldn't be perfect enough, and she would come up with new rules and regulations just to punish people. If a host called out sick, they were literally children, she would berate them on the phone and make them cry. If a cook made a mistake on a plate, she would humiliate them in front of the staff, accuse them of doing it on purpose, and then give us all the silent treatment for hours after. Seriously. If someone's cash out was off, even by a few cents, she would accuse them of theft and force me to cut down their hours. As a fellow manager, I was mostly spared from her awful behavior, though I had to hear about her treatment from my staff almost every day. All of this was just the run-of-the-mill bad boss stuff, until it came time for our yearly staff evaluation meetings. This is where Raul enters the story. Raul was a hard-working dishwasher who had moved to our state from Puerto Rico a few years earlier, and spoke English with some difficulty. Whenever I had to go over anything official with him, we would have a coworker translate between us to be sure we both were communicating clearly. Jan refused this courtesy to Raul. This made his evaluation pretty difficult. Raul managed to communicate to us that due to recent cuts in his hours, he would be forced to get a second job to pay his bills. Something about this absolutely set Jan off. She told him she would fire him if he dared. I could see plainly on the intake paperwork in front of me that Raul had been hired with the understanding that it would be a full-time position. So I pointed that out. Jan was furious, but agreed through gritted teeth that if Raul agreed not to get a second job, she would bump his hours to at least 35 hours a week. It was stated as clear as day, and I documented it in my daily manager logbook. Work went on as usual after that, and I didn't think much of this meeting again for a few months. Another time, a while later, while filling out information for tax returns, Jan called me into the office. I could tell she had pulled the tiny room apart looking for something. "All the information about our Puerto Rican employees is gone," she told me with a mixture of panic and suspicion. I looked at the files in question, and they all seemed to be in order, so I was confused and told her I couldn't help. A few minutes later, I walked back in the office to find her arguing with Rosa, our most talented chef and a Puerto Rican native. Rosa was perfectly fluent in English. "No, Rosa," Jan was speaking to Rosa as though she was hard of hearing or mentally slow. "Where is your green card?"
"What are you talking about?"
Rosa was confused.
"Are you illegal or something? Is that why you broke in here? To hide the proof?"
Jan wasn't yelling, but her eyes were cold and flashing with rage.
"What?"
Rosa was starting to get angry now. It suddenly clicked for me, so I interrupted. "Jan, you do realize that Puerto Rico is a United States territory, right?"
"Of course I know that,"
Jan snapped back. "Okay, so you know that Rosa has a social security number, like any other American native."
"Oh, right. Never mind, Rosa. You can go back to work.
Jan did not apologize for accusing Rosa of theft. I was so done with this place after that. Jan did all kinds of little things like that, and she never apologized. I had already gotten a second job offer for a place closer to my house when the final straw came. I was the closing manager one day and got in just before the dinner rush to see Raoul storming out the back door. He didn't speak much English, but his
fucking bitch
was very clear. Jan had lied about raising his hours to 35 per week, so Raoul had gotten the second job he talked about. When Jan found out, she fired him. But not before saying something about how
all you illegals are the same.
She was really fixated on these American citizens being illegal aliens for some reason. By this point, I fucking hated this woman. She told me once my clothing made me look poor in front of the whole staff. I was wearing what she made me wear. Meanwhile, she wore open-toed shoes behind the line, which is against the health codes. And once, her fake nail fell off in the coleslaw, and she wouldn't let anyone toss it out after she retrieved it. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I have a life to live. Since I knew I would be leaving soon anyway, I told Raoul he should go after our boss for wrongful termination, since I had documented proof, with Jan's signature, that he had been promised more hours and that Jan had broken the agreement, not Raoul. The last time I saw Jan was on my way out of Raoul's lawyer's office after giving a deposition about several labor laws she had violated. At least the ones that I knew about. Apparently, there were many others that she had broken in front of other employees. She couldn't even look me in the eye. The best part? At my deposition, I learned that Jan was actually the one who was illegally in this country. Her green card had recently expired. She was Canadian. She ended up being sent back to Canada as a result of this case, and no one has heard from her since. Raoul was granted 6 months of unemployment pay, plus the restaurant had to pay for his legal fees. They closed that location not long after. Maybe they should hire their managers more carefully next time? Jan, if you're reading this, I hope you got your shit together. I also hope you learn to wear closed-toed shoes behind the line. You wouldn't want to end up a huge, gigantic fuck-up due to your own negligence, now would you? And then in the comments, we got a bunch of Canadians who are disavowing her. I'd like to say, we didn't want her back. A Canadian. I'd also like to add, Jen, get fucked, bud. Another Canadian. I'd also like to mention, Canadians aren't always the nicest people ever. Yet another Canadian, who was apparently born in the South or some shit. Do not believe this violent and hateful Canada goose pretending to be a Canadian. Yet another Canadian. If you got a problem with Canada gooses, you got a problem with me, and I suggest you let that marinate. This next story comes to us from Joshua Beebe. I get the ultimate revenge on an identity thief. Long post. To set the stage, it was 2005, and I was living on my own. I had a girlfriend, my own apartment, and a paid-off used car. I was working as the assistant manager of a gas station. I made decent money for the time and was living comfortably, but I was far from being rich. My younger brother, Kyle, was living with me at the time. He had serious behavioral problems, oppositional defiance disorder, ADHD, etc., some of which were due to a shared rough upbringing, abuse of a serious nature. He had nowhere to go as the rest of my family refused to deal with him. In their defense, he did lie, cheat, and steal on a daily basis, and had a drug habit. He even broke my arm deliberately once. I was trying to do the right thing and get him on track. I got him a job, and would take him to work, gave him some spending money, and allowed him to live rent-free. The rules were simple. I didn't care if he smoked weed, but it wouldn't be in my apartment. Drugs would not cross into my apartment. One day, I decided to surprise my girlfriend with 9 Inch Nails tickets at the Tabernacle in Atlanta for her birthday. They were her favorite band. I had this planned months in advance, and ended up working a double shift the night of the concert and driving down there due to some sudden personal issues at work. When I got back the following morning, which I had off, I stopped by my work to make sure there were no sudden schedule changes. My manager, Betty Jo, saw me and had a look on her face I had only seen the day she got robbed. I knew it was bad. She sat me down and explained that Kyle had tried to get a ride to a spot in town that was notorious for selling drugs. Kyle admitted he was trying to sell a significant quantity of weed and coke to a coworker, which would have cost me my job. I got up and peeled out of the parking lot, headed for home, which was literally 40 seconds away. He broke the rules. He knew it was the only way to get immediately removed. It was even in writing because I made him sign a letter stating the rules. So I ejected him from the apartment that day, despite his protests. Fast forward 4 months, he would call me occasionally and update me on how he was doing. He said he got a job making a ton of money. I congratulated him. I was saving money since kicking him out. I didn't pay attention to my balance as I keep a running tally in my head. My girlfriend decided we should go to the beach for the weekend, as I had a rare weekend off. I went to withdraw $300 so we could have a blast. Insufficient funds. I thought there has to be an error, so I tried again. Same error. I went home and checked my bank statement. I was over $9,500 shy of where I should have been. I checked my statement. There were huge cash withdrawals every day up to the maximum allowed limit, day after day after day. $900 at AT&T, an astronomical sum at that time, hundreds of dollars at liquor stores, clothes, dozens of transactions I'd never made, etc. I printed my statements and went directly to the large regional branch. I was told it was definitely identity theft and that it's unusual because it was in the north of my town. I was told to get anything back I had to turn the investigation over to the bank, so I did. A few days later, I got a phone call from the officer investigating. He asked to meet. He had a stack of printed photos almost a foot high as every transaction on an ATM takes a picture.
Do you know this guy?
I informed the detective it was Kyle. The investigator told me Kyle had the money to evade police for a long time if he desired, and no stable address or job to be picked up at, so it would be a long shot of finding him. I told my buddy, Rick from here on out, what happened. Rick was a gruff, 6'4", Native American man who was well-muscled from a life of hard labor. Rick was a good person, but if you screwed with him or his friends, he was devious and loved scorched earth tactics. You didn't bring small problems to him. He immediately offered to help. We became friends after I found out he was sleeping with Betty Jo, who was a little person, 4'8" in heels. He came into the store and I started laughing because the mental image was too much. He said, "What are you laughing at?"
Gay slur.
We were friends ever since. Now Kyle loved Rick despite the fact that Rick was a massive asshole to him on a regular basis. Kyle wanted his approval desperately. He concocted a plan. He would call Kyle, get him to come over under the guise that I had a falling out with Rick over the way I treated Kyle. Naturally, Kyle ate the story, hook, line, and sinker. Kyle gave Rick an address to meet, an abandoned car wash in the north of town. We loaded up his truck, and the trap was set. Rick hops out of the truck and tells Kyle to get in. I was laying down in the front seat so he couldn't see me. He opens the door and I put him in a headlock and pull him in. We go back to Rick's place while my brother visibly sweats and even cries at some points. We cooked him dinner and calmly sat down, ate, and then cleaned up. The entire time, Kyle had convinced himself he was about to get murdered in the woods. We gave him a chance to explain himself. Naturally, as was his way, he lied, denied, and swore on everything living and dead he had nothing to do with it. I grabbed a stack of photos from the investigator and silently slid them across the table. Again, he denied everything. "This was a setup! You're trying to make me a felon! I did nothing wrong!" I had enough. I called a non-emergency number and the police came to pick him up. We said he showed up unexpectedly and started to get violent. When they searched him, he had Oxycontin, a felony, and he tried to assault me in front of the officer, screaming about how we set him up and all of this was unjust. He ended up getting arrested on something like 350 felonies as every transaction across state lines. This was pled down to 1 or 2 felonies. Kyle ended up getting 5 years with early release in 3. I think this was because, despite his checkered past, family never pressed charges, so his record was clean. He has been in and out of the 5-star luxury federal resorts ever since for such wonderful things as the manufacturing and distribution of meth, child endangerment, theft, etc. I ended up with a full refund. Too long didn't read. Brother stole $9,500. I went scorched earth and got him put in prison and got my money back. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of r/ProRevenge. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can also click one of these videos on the end screen if you want to be taken to a different video of mine. As always, all the sources are in the description. The question of the day I have for you is, if you had a relative steal your identity and had the opportunity to put them in prison, would you? Does it matter which relative it is? Mom, dad, sister, uncle? Please let me know in the comments below.